Do you believe in instant karma? What if the very system built to oppress someone turned into the weapon that set them free? This is the story of a police officer who thought he could humiliate a woman in front of the world. But within hours, his career, his freedom, and even his identity as a man of authority would be crushed by the very person he underestimated. It all began on a cool autumn morning in Brookdale, a quiet city where the courthouse stood like a towering monument of law and order. Dressed in a plain navy coat, carrying a modest leather case filled with legal papers, a woman named Rachel Carter approached the courthouse steps. To the casual eye, she looked like any citizen going about her business. But in that moment, to Officer Daniel Briggs, she was nothing more than a target. Another street rat trying to slip in where she doesn't belong, he sneered under his breath. His words carried poison, and when Rachel stepped forward, he blocked her path with an arrogant smirk. Without hesitation, his hand lashed out, striking her across the face so hard the sound echoed off the marble walls. Her case flew from her grasp, files scattering into the wind like fallen leaves. Animals like you belong in cages, not in courthouses. Briggs spat, gripping her by the throat and slamming her against the cold stone wall. Metal cuffs bit into her wrists as two other officers laughed nearby, filming with their phones as if her humiliation was entertainment. Rachel's cheek throbbed from the sting, but her eyes did not break. Instead, they focused on a polished bronze plaque just above the entrance. Judge R. Carter, presiding. 20 feet away from her own courtroom, she was shackled like a criminal by the very system she had sworn to protect. Minutes later, inside the courtroom, Officer Briggs strutted to the witness stand. His uniform sharp, his voice steady, his lies already prepared. He had played this game before. Rewrite the truth, cast himself as the hero, and watch the system protect him. Your Honor, Briggs began smoothly. The defendant attempted to breach courthouse security. She was erratic, refused to show identification, and grew aggressive when I tried to perform a standard security check. I had no choice but to use minimal force, minimal force. The words slid from his tongue like oil. Behind him, Rachel sat bruised and handcuffed at the defendant's table, her dignity hidden but not erased. Watching quietly, she listened to the fabrications pile up, each one sharper than the last. Judge Robert Langston, a frail man nearing retirement, nodded thoughtfully as Briggs continued. She was dressed suspiciously, carrying documents that appeared stolen. When questioned, she shouted obscenities and threatened me. I've dealt with this pattern many times, people pretending to be someone important to avoid accountability. But I wasn't fooled. From the gallery, his fellow officers, Lopez and Turner, exchanged approving looks, familiar with Briggs' rehearsed stories. He told them so often he believed them himself. She resisted arrest, Briggs added with false confidence, forcing me to restrain her for the safety of everyone here. Honestly, I showed remarkable restraint given how violent she became. Every word etched into the record by the stenographer was a lie, but Rachel sat still, her silence more dangerous than any outburst could have been. Because what Briggs didn't know was that his victim wasn't just another woman. She was the storm waiting to break over his entire career. The prosecutor, Diana Reeves, nodded along, her eyes gleaming with certainty that the case was already won. This woman was clearly trespassing. The state recommends charges of assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and trespassing on government property. Briggs allowed himself a smug smile, convinced he had once again bent the system to his will. He thought the game was over. He thought Rachel Carter was already defeated. But what he didn't realize was that the woman sitting silently across from him was not who he believed her to be. And when she finally opened her mouth, the entire courthouse would see a reversal, unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The courtroom was heavy with silence, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of the stenographer's keys. Officer Briggs leaned back in the witness chair, his smug grin daring anyone to challenge his version of events. He had done this for years, spin half-truths, bury the reality, and watch judges and prosecutors swallow every word. But there was one thing different about this morning. His victim wasn't trembling. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even speaking. Rachel Carter sat there with her wrists cuffed, her back straight, her eyes calm. If anyone looked closely, they would have seen the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. Officer Lopez, the prosecutor called. Can you corroborate Briggs's testimony? Yes, ma'am, Lopez replied firmly, standing tall as if he were reciting from a script. I saw the defendant refuse to comply. Officer Briggs showed remarkable professionalism throughout. Remarkable professionalism, Rachel thought, repeating the phrase in her mind like a dagger waiting to strike. And Officer Turner? Reeves pressed. Turner nodded eagerly. The defendant carried confidential files. She may have been attempting fraud or identity theft. The judge's brows furrowed with interest. Fraud, theft. The words fell like stones into the courtroom's air, painting Rachel darker with every syllable. Briggs straightened in his seat, savoring the moment. Your Honor, in my 15 years of service, I've seen this playbook countless times. People who think they're above the law. They scream discrimination, claim they're lawyers, judges, even senators, anything to avoid accountability. But I wasn't fooled. I acted to protect this court, this system. The gallery nodded in quiet agreement. A few clerks murmured, their gazes fixed on Rachel as if she were already guilty. Even Judge Langston looked persuaded, his frail hands folded neatly on the bench. Briggs wasn't just telling lies. He was weaving a story that everyone had heard before, one that fit so neatly into their expectations that they didn't think to question it. But Rachel Carter wasn't here to play his game. When the prosecutor rested her case, Judge Langston turned to Rachel almost dismissively. Defendant, do you wish to make a statement before we proceed further? Rachel rose slowly, the cuffs clinking with every movement. Her bruise caught the light, a visible reminder of the violence Briggs had unleashed. Yet she moved with dignity, each step calculated, her presence commanding in a way no one expected from the accused. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. I will address these allegations. The room shifted. For the first time that morning, all eyes turned to her, not with disdain, but with curiosity. Officer Briggs claims I was trespassing, she began. In reality, I was walking on a public sidewalk at precisely 8:46 a.m., a right guaranteed by constitutional law. She paused, scanning the room with eyes sharp as a blade. I assume this court is familiar with Brookfield v. Civic Council, where the state Supreme Court ruled that public sidewalks adjacent to government buildings are designated public forums. The stenographer faltered, her fingers hesitating mid-stroke. The prosecutor blinked in confusion. This was not the rambling of a desperate woman. This was precise, controlled, educated. Rachel continued, each word delivered with surgical precision. As for the documents I carried, Officer Briggs labeled them suspicious. They are authentic case files, memoranda, and administrative records, all materials I am lawfully permitted to possess in my professional capacity. Judge Langston leaned forward, intrigued. And what profession would that be, Ms. Carter? Rachel allowed the faintest smile to surface. We'll get to that in a moment, Your Honor. The tension thickened. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, sweat prickling at his collar. Something about her confidence gnawed at him. He had expected tears, rage, denial, not this calm dismantling of his every claim. Rachel's voice grew firmer. Officer Briggs also testified that his body camera malfunctioned. Interesting, because as this court surely knows, county regulations require automatic backup of all footage to a central server, and this courthouse conveniently is blanketed by security cameras positioned at 15-foot intervals. The color drained from Briggs's face. He had forgotten about the surveillance coverage. I hereby request, Rachel said with authority, that this court issue a preservation order for all video and audio evidence from 8:45 to 9:15 this morning, including courthouse security feeds, officer body cam backups, and recordings made by bystanders. Objection! Prosecutor Reeves leapt to her feet. The defendant cannot make evidentiary demands without proper representation. Rachel turned her gaze toward her, a look so steady it seemed to silence the room. Your Honor, pro se defendants retain the constitutional right to present evidence in their own defense. I trust this court recalls Brady v. Maryland, which requires preservation of exculpatory evidence. The silence was suffocating. Langston cleared his throat, visibly unsettled. You seem unusually familiar with legal procedure, Ms. Carter. Do you have formal training? Rachel tilted her head slightly, her eyes glinting with restrained amusement. I have some experience with the judicial system, Your Honor. Then she reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. From inside, she drew a gleaming gold identification badge and held it high. Even from across the courtroom, the embossed seal was unmistakable. My name, she said clearly, is Judge Rachel Carter, And this morning, Officer Briggs assaulted me on the steps of my own courthouse. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The moment Rachel Carter revealed her identity, the air itself seemed to shatter. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Court clerks dropped their pens. One bailiff even stumbled backward, his jaw hanging open. Judge Langston went pale, his hand trembling against the bench. The prosecutor froze in place, her objections evaporating into stunned silence. But no one looked more undone than Officer Briggs. His smirk melted instantly into horror, his mouth moving but no sound escaping. The woman he had cuffed, slapped, mocked, and paraded as a criminal was not some powerless stranger. She was the very authority he had sworn to respect, the presiding judge of this courthouse. Rachel's voice cut cleanly through the shock. This morning, Officer Briggs didn't just assault a citizen, he assaulted a federal judge. He humiliated me in front of my own courthouse, lied under oath, and thought he could bury it beneath the same narrative he has used to destroy others for years. Briggs tried to speak. Your Honor, I didn't know. You didn't care to know, Rachel snapped, her calm cracking just enough to reveal a current of righteous anger. You saw a black woman. You assumed she was beneath you. And you acted on that prejudice with violence. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the hum of the air conditioning sounded deafening. Bailiff Henderson, Rachel said firmly, turning toward the stunned officer who had served her courtroom faithfully for over a decade. Retrieve my judicial robes, and bring my gavel. The man's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. Yes, Your Honor. His voice cracked with guilt. I should have. You weren't part of this, Rachel interrupted gently. Do what I asked, quickly. Henderson nodded and bolted from the room. The courtroom buzzed with nervous whispers. Some clerks leaned toward one another, whispering names, rulings, memories of cases Rachel Carter had presided over. The realization spread like fire. This was no ordinary defendant. This was a woman who had sentenced murderers, dismantled criminal conspiracies, and been a beacon of law for over 20 years. And now, she was reclaiming her rightful seat. When Henderson returned minutes later, he carried a black garment bag and a polished wooden box. The sight of it sent a tremor through the gallery. Slowly, deliberately, Rachel unzipped the bag and withdrew her judicial robes. The flowing black fabric with its subtle gold trim seemed to shimmer with authority. She slipped it over her shoulders with practiced grace, the robe transforming her from victim to judge in an instant. From the wooden box, she lifted a ceremonial gavel, its handle engraved with the words, "Justice is blind, but she sees all." The gallery watched in reverent silence. Even Judge Langston sat frozen, as if unable to comprehend the weight of what was unfolding before his eyes. Rachel adjusted the robe and handed her badge to the bailiff. "Announce me properly." Henderson swallowed hard, his voice breaking at first before it grew strong. "All rise. Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Rachel Carter presiding. The words struck like thunder. Every person in the room stood instinctively. Even Briggs, shaking violently, staggered to his feet. Judge Langston quietly slipped from his chair, almost retreating, robes flapping as he scurried from the courtroom like a ghost chased by truth. Rachel stepped behind the bench. Her bench. She settled into the seat slowly, deliberately, the gavel firm in her grip. The bruise on her cheek, far from diminishing her, now seemed like a mark of power, a living symbol of the abuse she had endured and the reckoning about to unfold. Her eyes swept the courtroom, each word laced with controlled fire. "Officer Briggs, you testified under oath just hours ago. You described me as another entitled activist, someone pretending to be important. Do you remember saying that?" Briggs's lips trembled. Yes, Your Honor. You also declared that people like me need to learn that actions have consequences." Rachel's tone sharpened. "Do you recall?" His voice broke. "I didn't." "You did," she said coldly. She reached beneath the bench and lifted a tablet. "Officer Briggs, let me refresh your memory. This is security footage from the courthouse steps. Multiple angles, high definition." She tapped the screen. The courtroom collectively leaned forward as the video came to life. There was Rachel walking calmly toward the courthouse. There was Briggs blocking her path, his sneer unmistakable. Then his words, sharp as venom, filled the courtroom speakers. "Another street rat trying to sneak in. Animals like you belong in cages." The footage showed the slap, the violent grab, the cuffs biting into her wrists. The courtroom erupted in horrified gasps. Rachel paused the video. "Tell me, Officer Briggs, do you see any aggression from me in this footage? Any profanity? Any threats?" Briggs was silent, his eyes wide with panic. "Then let us examine your claim that your body cam malfunctioned." Rachel's voice sliced the air like steel. "This is the backup feed automatically uploaded to county servers every 60 seconds. Did you forget about that, officer?" The screen lit up again. This time, Briggs' voice was even uglier. "Look at this one, thinking she owns the place. Time to teach another lesson. These people never learn." The gallery audibly recoiled. A reporter scribbled frantically in her notepad, her eyes wide with disbelief. Prosecutor Reeves buried her face in her files as if hiding could erase her complicity. Rachel let the footage play, each second hammering another nail into Briggs's coffin. The jury of public opinion had already shifted, but she wasn't done. Her voice softened, almost conversational, which made it even more chilling. "Officer Briggs, earlier today you told this court that I needed to learn my place. But perhaps it's time we consider where your place truly is." The gavel hovered over the bench, its weight a promise of the storm still to come. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Officer Briggs stood trembling, his face drained of color. Every arrogant word he had spoken just hours before now hung in the air like a noose tightening around his neck. But Rachel Carter was not finished. In fact, she was only beginning. She set the tablet aside and picked up a thick manila folder that Henderson had placed before her bench. Its edges were worn, the corners bent, evidence of months of painstaking preparation. "Officer Briggs," she began, her voice carrying like a bell, "you believed this morning was routine. You thought you could lie under oath, rewrite the truth, and walk away unscathed. But what you didn't know is that I have been investigating misconduct in this police department for the past 6 months. And your name appears on nearly every page." The words hit like an earthquake. Briggs staggered back against the table, his knees buckling. No, that's not possible." Rachel flipped the folder open. "Complaint number 1, filed in 2008. A 60-year-old grandmother assaulted during a traffic stop. You allegedly called her a rat and slammed her face onto her car hood when she asked for your badge number. Your department marked the complaint unsubstantiated." She turned the page with deliberate precision. "Complaint number 12, 2013. A 17-year-old honor student accused you of planting drugs in his backpack after he refused to inform on his older brother. Once again, unsubstantiated." Her eyes locked on Briggs, whose breathing was shallow, uneven. Complaint number 27, 2016. A prominent surgeon, Dr. Michael Rhodes, arrested outside his own home because you claimed he looked out of place. He spent 12 hours in jail before his attorney secured his release. Result? Unsubstantiated. Each example fell like a hammer, pounding the courtroom into stunned silence. Rachel lifted her gaze to the gallery. 47 complaints, ladies and gentlemen. 47 times people came forward, telling nearly identical stories of Officer Briggs' abuse. 47 times the department looked the other way. The reporters in the back scribbled furiously, their pens struggling to keep up. Even Judge Langston, who had quietly slipped back into the gallery, sat pale and trembling, whispering prayers under his breath. Rachel wasn't done. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a chart, placing it on an easel beside the bench. The paper gleamed under the courtroom lights, the statistics stark and undeniable. Over 15 years of service, Officer Briggs made 1,206 arrests. Of those arrests, more than 85% involved people of color. Yet the patrol area he worked in was majority white. She tapped the chart with a pen, each statistic cutting deeper, even more telling. In 60% of arrests involving black or Hispanic individuals, Briggs used physical force. For white suspects, 12%. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even those who had believed Briggs moments before shifted uneasily in their seats. And here, Rachel continued, pulling another document, is perhaps the most damning number of all. 435 cases tied to Officer Briggs have been dismissed, due to lack of evidence, prosecutorial misconduct, or violations of constitutional rights. That's a dismissal rate of over 1/3 of his entire career. She slammed the document onto the bench. That is not law enforcement. That is criminal behavior disguised as authority. Briggs finally broke. Your Honor, please, I was just doing my job. You don't understand. Rachel's eyes blazed. Your job? Your job was to uphold the Constitution, to protect the citizens you swore to serve. Instead, you terrorized them. You brutalized them, and today, you assaulted a federal judge on the steps of her own courthouse. Briggs shook his head violently, sweat dripping down his temple. I didn't know. I didn't know you were— That's exactly the point, Rachel interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. You didn't bother to know. You didn't see me as a person at all. You saw only your own prejudice and you acted on it. Rachel lifted another folder thicker than the first. And if you think this case is only about me, you are gravely mistaken. The gallery leaned forward, every eye fixed on her. For 6 months, I have been working directly with the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI's Civil Rights Division. We have monitored your arrests, your communications, your so-called reports. You have been under investigation all this time, Officer Briggs, and this morning you provided us with the final piece of evidence we needed. The room exploded in whispers. Even the prosecutor's face turned ashen, her hands trembling as she realized she had tied her career to Briggs's lies. Rachel's voice rang out above the chaos. Today, justice is no longer blind. Justice sees everything, and Officer Briggs, it sees you. She reached for the gavel, her hand steady, her eyes unflinching. You told this court that actions have consequences. Now you're about to learn exactly what that means. The gavel hovered in the air. The crowd held its breath. The storm was seconds away from breaking. The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. The entire courtroom jumped. Officer Briggs, Rachel Carter said, her voice carrying the quiet force of 20 years on the bench. Earlier you claimed that I needed to learn my place. But after everything we've heard and seen today, it's time we discuss yours. Her words sliced through him like a blade. Briggs gripped the table for support, his once arrogant posture now crumbling. Rachel opened the thickest folder yet, filled with years of records, transcripts, and sworn testimony. Every case you've touched in the past decade is now under review. Every conviction you tainted with lies. Every life you destroyed to protect your own pride. 435 dismissed cases, dozens of settlements, and nearly $2.5 million paid out by this county to silence your victims. Money that could have gone to schools, hospitals, and community safety instead of covering up your brutality. She raised her eyes to meet his. You didn't just fail as an officer. You failed as a man sworn to justice. Briggs whimpered, his lips trembling. Please, Your Honor. I didn't mean— You didn't mean? Rachel's tone grew sharper. You didn't mean to call me an animal? You didn't mean to slam me against the wall of my own courthouse? You didn't mean to lie under oath, to commit perjury in front of the very people who trusted you? Your excuses are as worthless as your testimony. Her gaze swept across the courtroom, pulling the audience into the judgment as if they were all part of the verdict. For too long, men like Briggs have hidden behind their badge. For too long, complaints were dismissed, evidence ignored, truth buried. But today proves something vital. No one, no police officer, no prosecutor, not even a judge is above the law. The gallery erupted into applause, a thunder of approval. But Rachel raised her hand and silence returned instantly. Order in the court, she said firmly. We aren't finished. She leaned forward, the weight of justice in every syllable. Officer Daniel Briggs, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I find you guilty of felony assault in the first degree. I find you guilty of assaulting a judicial officer, a federal crime with a mandatory minimum of 5 years. I find you guilty of perjury under oath, and I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal offense punishable by up to 10 years. The words echoed like thunderclaps. Briggs collapsed into his chair, sobbing openly now, his uniform stained with sweat. Rachel Carter wasn't moved. Your actions represent not just personal failure, but institutional rot, she continued. For 15 years you operated under the belief that the system would protect you, no matter how many lives you ruined. You believed your badge was a shield against accountability, but your arrogance blinded you to one simple truth. Justice always comes. Her hand tightened around the gavel. This court sentences you, Officer Briggs, to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The prosecutor's pen clattered to the floor. Henderson, the bailiff, stood straighter, his chest swelling with relief that justice had finally spoken. Briggs collapsed completely, his body shaking with violent sobs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Rachel's eyes softened for only a moment. but her voice remained steady. Your apology is not for me. It is for the hundreds of people whose voices were silenced, whose complaints were buried, whose lives you shattered. And for them, your remorse comes 15 years too late. The gavel slammed down once more, final and unyielding. But Rachel Carter's judgment didn't stop with Briggs. She turned to the courtroom at large, her voice now reaching beyond walls, beyond borders, as if meant for the entire nation. Let this case stand as a warning, she declared, to every officer who believes their badge makes them untouchable, to every prosecutor who turns a blind eye, to every leader who excuses corruption for the sake of comfort. Justice is patient, but it never forgets. And when it arrives like a storm. Reporters scribbled furiously, already sensing the words that would appear on front pages across the country. Rachel raised her gavel one last time. Today we reclaim this courthouse not for power but for truth. Not for vengeance but for justice. The wood cracked against the bench, sealing the verdict. In the weeks that followed, the consequences rippled outward. Federal investigators swept into Brookdale's police department, uncovering webs of corruption and cover-ups that had poisoned the force for years. 12 officers were terminated. Several supervisors were indicted. The department was placed under strict federal oversight. The 435 cases Briggs had poisoned were reopened. Wrongfully convicted men and women were freed. Families who had been silenced for years finally had their day in court. The courthouse itself was renamed the Carter Federal Courthouse. A bronze plaque at the entrance bearing the words, "Here." Justice finally found its voice. As for Rachel Carter, she became more than a judge. She became a symbol, a reminder that courage can change systems, that truth can outlive lies, and that even when justice is mocked, silenced, or delayed, it never dies. And somewhere, in a federal prison cell, Daniel Briggs sits alone, replaying the morning he thought he was powerful, the morning he slapped a woman he believed was beneath him, the morning he thought he had won, but he hadn't slapped a powerless stranger. He had slapped justice itself, and justice hit back.